A grand jury has declined to issue criminal charges against a man down in Houston who stood up for folks at a taco place when they all were getting robbed. We've got fake guns. We've got a little bit of a deadly force breakdown. We've got a lot to cover here. So guys, let's get into it. So first, a quick recap in case you missed my initial video about a year ago, which I'll link in the description box below, also in our pinned comment. That has all the video on it, but YouTube didn't like that video, so I can't re-show that video, basically. There's some violence and so forth that's going on in there. The gist to it is that we're at a taco joint. We're in Houston. It's 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night on January 5th, 2023. There were 10 customers in there who were enjoying a late evening taco meal when suddenly a man who was armed broke in, walked in, but he had a ski mask on and gloves on, and he started pointing what appeared to be a real pistol, though subsequently turned out to be a fake pistol. Walked around pointing his gun at patrons demanding their money. Then, of course, what happened is eventually, I'm not going to say the exact words, but something to the effect of screw around and find out. Because one patron decided, not today, not on Thursday, January 5th. And he stood up, fired 9 shots. Now, importantly here, I break down the shots into 3 different legal categories. And it's going to be important for you to understand this because even though this gentleman was not processed under a true bill, okay, and I'm going to explain what that means because this is going to be really important, super, super important for people to understand because I don't want people taking the wrong message out of this. I want you to understand what happened and why it likely happened that way so that you can take that information, tuck it in your head, and go about your daily lives. First, let's talk about these fact patterns and let's specifically break down the shots into a couple different categories that we can then legally understand how a prosecutor, a judge, jury can all look at this. So first, the guy shot shots 1 through 4 at the bad guy. When the bad guy, the robber, was holding his weapon, was standing, the shots were to the chest center mass area. So that's shots 1 through 4, okay? So bad guy's robbing the place. He's got his weapon out. It appears to be a gun, a real gun, probably loaded. We don't know. That's the risk you take when you're a bad guy, of course. It doesn't matter if it's fake. If it looks real, if you're creating that deadly threat, and if someone else can articulate the fact that when the bad guy is saying, give me all your stuff or else I'm going to kill you, or whatever else he may have been saying in this particular case, yeah, that's going to be creating a deadly threat. So shots 1 through 4, when the bad guy is up, ambulatory, and seemingly armed and creating that deadly threat, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find even the most anti-gun prosecutors saying, yeah, no good. One particular issue you could try to bring up was whether or not the bad guy was directly pointing the gun at the good guy or not. Of course, if he wasn't, the good guy waited for him to walk past him and then basically shot him in the back. I don't have a problem with that at all because what's the alternative? You're only allowed to draw and fire on a drawn firearm? That doesn't make sense at all, right? The, of course, immortal words from retired Colonel Jeff Cooper, forefather in many respects to so many different things when it comes to firearms, firearm training, shooting, and so forth. He once said something to the effect of, if you're in a fair fight, your tactics suck. So right, drawing on a drawn firearm, not necessarily the best tactic, but if you got to do it, maybe you got to do it. He didn't have to do it here, and he didn't. And I don't have any issue with that, though I'm sure some people will. Super quickly, if you've been enjoying this video, show your support for the Second Amendment. Show your support for people who are forced to reasonably use violence in self-defense or defense of others by hitting that like button. It's the easiest and simple way to help out this channel, our project, our mission. And of course, if you just found us while browsing through, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We do tons of content just like this, as well as many other things. But hey, enough of that. Back to the video. Shots 5 through 8, however, the bad guy is now on the ground, seemingly not moving, and the weapon has fallen several feet away, so it does not appear to be in the bad guy's hand. That's when shots 5 through 8 happen. Then shot 9, the bad guy is down, not moving, and the armed civilian has his weapon at this point, nearly point blank to what appears to be the head, maybe neck. And again, I'm getting all my information based on the publicly available video, so if this is wrong, someone please let me know. This is where we obviously get into cringe territory, and I at least say this from a legal cringe perspective. So let's take a look at some of the analysis. And again, the longer version of this is in the other video linked in the description box below. Briefly, we've got 3 different categories of shots. We've got 1 through 4, which is when the bad guy's up, around, seemingly with a weapon and seemingly ready to use it. I think you're going to be hard pressed to find any prosecutor in the world who's going to say, yep, not good to shoot there. Okay. Don't get me wrong. They exist, but going to be hard pressed. I'd much rather be the defense attorney in that case. Shots 5 through 8, where we've got the guy on the ground and the weapon set off to the side, fell, difficult. Yes, the bad guy could get back up. How do we know he doesn't have another weapon? All those questions persist. But at the end of the day, what the standard is going to be, generally speaking in most states, is whether or not that person is still a deadly threat when he's on the ground after you put 4 shots into him and he's not moving and the weapon's a couple feet away. You can see how that could go either way. But then we've got that last shot, shot 9, which appears to be when good guy goes over, takes the bad guy's gun, then puts 1 more into him. Don't really know what to say there. That's just bad. Don't do that, okay? But this goes back to the power of the grand jury system, because I don't know any judge or commissioner who's going to say, yeah, it looks good to me when viewing that footage. Now, I'm going to caveat that with the one exception being we're talking about medical examiners, and there could develop a conversation about which shot was the fatal shot. So for instance, if shot number 1 was the fatal shot, then you could argue shots 2 through 9 are all more or less inconsequential, at least from a legal perspective, as to whether or not, hey, any of them should constitute their own homicide charge or something like that, or recklessly endangering safety, or whatever it is the case may be there. So that could be some of the hinged points as to what would a medical examiner, what would an ME say? And realistically, what are they willing and able to say to a reasonable degree of medical or scientific certainty, or whatever Texas's particular expert witness standard might be. But you can see how some of those issues could play their way out. The reason why I said that this is part of the power of the grand jury system is that a grand jury can step outside simply what the black letter law is. In other words, what the statutes say. Because by statute, that 9th shot, that's pretty cringy. And shots 5 through 8, difficult, to put it mildly. But a jury can say, look, there's what the law says on paper, and then there's what the moral code is. There's what the moral law is. And they can, in essence, nullify a potential charge in this case, or conviction if we're talking about the context of a jury trial, and say, you know what? We think this guy was okay. Maybe he didn't do everything the way he ought to have done it, but at the end of the day, we think he's okay and not deserving of any conviction or charges. That is a major, major difference between these two systems. Preliminary hearings in many states, which are run by judges and commissioners, where I assure you, he would be getting charged of something, some sort of felony coming from this. Or on the other hand, a grand jury system, which can take a look at that moral and ethical code surrounding a situation and decide, you know what? There's more context that needs to go into this. I'm not saying one's better or worse. I'm saying that they're different. And this is a perfect example to illustrate those differences. In many states, before you can charge somebody with a felony or certain levels of felony, you basically have to get a grand jury to sign off on it. That's what we have seen here in Texas. What is a grand jury? Because you hear about it, but odds are many of you don't exactly know what it is. A grand jury is a jury that's convened by a prosecutor in a court in the absence of the defendant or defense counsel. So this is a one-sided conversation that a jury is hearing. The prosecutor demonstrates and puts on evidence, and they can basically put their case out there and make the arguments however strong or maybe a little limp-wristed. Not suggesting it's one way or the other in this case. I do not have that information. If you or someone you know has that information, please contact the channel, let me know. But the point is that this all happens outside the purview of the defense. The defense isn't allowed to cross-examine people. They may not even know necessarily what's going on here, though oftentimes they do because people in their vicinity, depending upon the nature of the case, may have been served subpoenas and things like that. Okay. Here, the grand jury took place nearly a year, about 360 days, give or take, from when the actual shooting transpired, which just goes to show you this stuff does not happen like what you see on TV, where everything's done in a matter of days or weeks. This is taken, for all practical intents and purposes, a year. A year. At the end of the grand jury indictment, the jury has to basically vote on whether or not they're going to issue a true bill, or however it is that your particular state words it. Check your local listings. The gist to it is this. Does the jury buy off on whether or not there should be criminal charges in this case? Did the prosecutor deliver on whatever their burden of proof was? Whatever that may have been, probable cause, you name it, okay? If the jury says yes, that doesn't mean the person's found guilty. Rather, it means that the prosecutor may now go ahead and file those formal criminal charges. Now the defendant has to come into court. Now they can have their attorney. Now they're entitled to evidence. Now they're entitled to confront the state's witnesses, put on their own evidence, all that kind of stuff, okay? So that's where the defendant gets formally looped in. Now, here's one of the reasons why this is so important, other than simply understanding the way that works. Many states do not have any kind of grand jury indictment system. In other words, for instance, here in my home state of Wisconsin, if the prosecutor wanted to actually bring charges, they have to get across a probable cause threshold. And rather than having a grand jury, kind of a gatekeeping speed bump, maybe more speed bump, maybe more gatekeeping, depending upon the charges, your local juries, the state you're in, and what you're trying to do with the facts and so on. But here in Wisconsin, we have something called a preliminary hearing system, which basically means that if the prosecutor believes that there's probable cause, they've got to outline that in a charging document called a criminal complaint, which is later followed up by the information and all this other kind of stuff. And there's a narrative fact pattern in there. And within that narrative fact pattern, there must be, within the four corners of that criminal complaint, probable cause to explain the who, what, where, when, why of why is the defendant being charged, or in the case of a multiple co-defendant case, why are all those different co-defendants listed in there? Okay, then you can take it to what's called a preliminary hearing, and that's where a court commissioner or a judge, not a jury, can weigh in on, okay, is there probable cause? The reason why I'm bringing this up is because a grand jury system has many pros and cons to it. On the one hand, you obviously lack the participation and perhaps even knowledge of the defendant, and let alone whatever assistance their counsel can provide. But on the other hand, you have a massive check of, in essence, the jury box. Now, the jury's only hearing what the prosecutor wants to put out, and the prosecutor is free to argue however they wish. But just the same, they've got to get 12 people to sign off on that. That can be big, as we saw here. Whereas in many other states, like my home state of Wisconsin, that is not the case. If the prosecutor can establish probable cause, which, by the way, does not mean what you probably think it means, which is more probable than not that something happened. Probable cause, when we're in the context of a preliminary hearing, is basically, is there some sort of way that we can factually reconcile that this could have theoretically have happened? And honesty, integrity, when it comes to witnesses and all that kind of stuff, doesn't play a factor, by the way, right? Basically, if someone gets in there and utters the magic words, there's a really strong chance that is likely enough to get the bind over to achieve the preliminary hearing and therefore release the case to be allowed to roll forward. Also, for what it's worth, keep in mind that at least here in Wisconsin, the defendants and the defense were not entitled to any of the evidence when the preliminary hearing comes up. So we're operating strictly off whatever we've been able to put together combined with the publicly available criminal complaint. We see what happened here in Texas as something that I do not think would have happened in many, many, many other states. This would not have happened in Wisconsin. If a prosecutor wants to go ahead and push these charges forward, then you down the lens, God forbid, if you were the person who's pulling the trigger in a state that wasn't as pro-self-defense friendly as the Texas jury in this particular case was, then you can see perhaps a very different outcome, not to mention an entirely different cost picture involved, because you're going to have to immediately go out and encumber yourself with the burden of hiring a defense attorney, perhaps experts, all that other kind of stuff. Another thing I want to point out for you as well is something that a lot of people may be missing. I don't know all the individual politics of Houston and all that other kind of stuff. What I do know is Houston's huge. It's a metropolis. And if Houston, like many other major cities around the United States, have a lot of things in common, there's probably a fair amount of crime, and it probably leans a little bit more blue, at least as compared to the rural areas. These are broad generalizations that I don't think most people would disagree with. A lot of people tend to think that, hey, these so-called blue juries or something like that from major metropolitan areas, these are going to be really rough on defendants when it comes to self-defense gun cases. That may not be the case. Now, the suburbs around them, that could be the case, right? You get a bunch of, forgive the expression, but you get a bunch of soccer moms or soccer dads who don't really understand the creeping and sometimes all too pervasive threat of violence and the need to carry a firearm. Hey, they might be sold on something as, yeah, why didn't he shoot him in the foot or shoot him in the leg or just call 911 and have the police teleport there? They may buy off on that kind of nonsense arguments. You get a bunch of people from a severely disadvantaged area that have experienced crime and violence on a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual basis. They're going to understand that oftentimes the only help is self-help, and you may consequently have a very different jury. So I just want to throw that out there to hopefully disabuse a lot of folks and maybe introduce some new facts out there that, look, these juries can be very different, and hopefully you got something out of this because you've learned something about the fact of, hey, here's loosely how a grand jury system works, and here's an alternative system for preliminary hearings. There's pros and cons either way. Which one do you think is better? Let me know in the comment field below. Let me know if you know which way your state goes. Which system does your state have? And keep in mind, like many states, they could have both on paper, but operatively, they only go one way, okay? Wisconsin can be like that too. So we appreciate you sticking around this long. Hopefully you got something out of this. This is the long-awaited update as to what happened in the Houston taco case. Don't forget, if you want to see the actual video, we've linked that in the description box below, as well as hopefully in that pinned comment below. I will see you in the discussion in the comment field. Now let's get to our quote of the day. This one comes from a gentleman named Karl Popper. Quote, "Those who promise us paradise on earth never produced anything but hell." A lot of truth there. Don't forget that like button. I will catch you in the comment field and in the next one. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.